Yeah, we'll talk a
Yeah.
little bit quick at the end.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the AP Environmental Science Review. And my name is Dr. Sowell, and this is...
Ms. Fassler, hi.
And we want to say, congratulations! Da-na-na-na-na-na. We're both wearing our party hats to say, congratulations, you did it. The exam is just, a little short ways away, and you've made it through all of these videos and you stuck out here with us. And so we are absolutely thrilled that you've done that. So we're super proud of you. I know I'm super proud of my students at Darnell Cookman, and I'm sure Ms. Fassler is proud of hers as well.
Yeah, we're really excited that you guys have stuck with us. I think those practice exams were really helpful, gotten a lot of positive feedback, feeling a little better about that. Dr. Sowell and I think, are just going to try to target some of the big questions and concerns that we've still been hearing from students about. This is the stuff I'm still a little iffy on for the exam, so let's get started.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fassler for a little bit.
So you've seen the screen a plethora of times. Remember that your exam is a week and a half away, 10 days, on Monday, May 18th. Time zones vary when you're going to log in for that. You have your 2 questions. If you've gone through the one of the practice tests with us, remember that first test is 25 minutes, but your timer is going to be set at 30. And the minute it gets down to the last 5 minutes, it'll turn red. That's when you are done writing, typing, and you're starting to upload. Second question, 15 minutes. That's the solution question. Same thing. The timer will be set for 20. But it's gonna, when it gets to 5 minutes left or after 15 minutes of writing, it's gonna turn red and you start uploading. You've also seen these task verbs before. I hope we've really stressed these a lot. We're going to spend a little bit of time today digging into those again, but that might even be something you want to have on one of your note sheets as you're preparing your open note stuff. So we're going to start talking a little bit today about how do we approach this environmental solution problem, the first FRQ. And I'll draw your attention over to the left there. Dr. Sowell especially, I think, is really focused on the scaffolding of that practice, how I go from 7A to 7B to 7C, and get a little bit more complex each time. So we're going to go through that process, but I want to share with you what might be a good organizational tool. So while you can certainly have your whole binder or packets or all of the note sheets that you've accumulated throughout your time that you were in class with your teacher, as well as all the notes and things that you've been organizing through the review sessions with Dr. Sowell and I, we think it might be helpful if you try to have big summary ideas. So this table is kind of an idea to show you how you might organize some of that information where you're going to say, I'm going to go through the curriculum. And I did that in a very simple way here. So you're going to see a lot of the big problems. Go through that curriculum and say, for every unit I'm looking at, how could I identify some type of environmental problem? There could be natural impacts, but we're more focusing here on how those human impacts, the human impacts on the environment. So I can identify the problem, can I describe the problem, and can I give potential solutions, pros and cons? Dr. Sowell, you want to add anything before we show them how this table could break down a little bit?
Yeah, I just think it's a brilliant way to organize your thoughts around the course. We absolutely know that one of the FRQs will be about environmental solutions. So why not go through those first 7 units, and every time you hit a problem, instantly jot it down, describe the problem, pros and cons of solutions. I think it's a really great way to reorganize the whole course in your head based on solving environmental problems. So yeah, I think it's a great tool.
And, even that process of walking through and physically kind of organizing it in that way, that stuff is going to stick with you really well. You're really going to conceptualize it. So let's take one of the first problems that we had on there, disruption to populations or loss of biodiversity. So the first thing we'll do is identify a problem. And that task verb, identify, means simply, I just provide information, no elaboration. So that could be loss of habitat is one cause of loss of biodiversity. And then that describing the problem, the definition of that task verb is to provide relevant characteristics. So before you just start writing everything you know about loss of habitat, stop and think for a minute. How would I describe to somebody from another planet, what do I mean by loss of habitat? What does that look like? Well, humans can clear land and destroy habitat or degrade it in such a way that it no longer serves any function for animals. And when I describe habitat, I want to put a little bit of meat on that. A lot of times at the reading, we see kids just throwing out this loss of habitat, loss of habitat. Make sure you describe what you mean by loss of habitat. They no longer have a place where they can protect themselves from predators or forage for food or protect their young.
Yeah, sound like you've taken the course. You know, I've said many times before, my Nana can go, well, you chop down the tree, the squirrel doesn't have a place to live. But you now have enough environmental science knowledge to describe that habitat lost in a little bit more robust way.
So the next thing then, and we're going to diverge and come back to solutions here in just a minute. I want to make sure you're clear on the difference that between that explain how and explain why, and how that's different than describe. So explain how deforestation impacts biodiversity. I'm analyzing the relationship between deforestation and loss of biodiversity. So the first thing I want to do is come right out and say, deforestation reduces biodiversity. That's a statement of claim about what that relationship is. And then I'm going to just put a little bit more meat on that. I'm going to keep going. The removal of trees in an area leads to the loss of animals for all their protected areas. This then could cause the population to decline. So I can't just say, oh, loss of habitat means loss of biodiversity. I need to explain how losing habitat leads to a loss of biodiversity. If those animals don't have their habitat, their populations are going to die off. There will be a loss of species or a loss of number of individuals. And a couple of things that I think I would put on my review sheet for this section was that term trophic cascade. Dr. Sowell did a really great job talking about that in the review video. Because now I can really go in and say, boy, if I lose a top predator, that impact is going to cascade all the way down that food chain. And that's where I'm getting that loss of biodiversity.
And can I just jump in really quick? I think words like reduces, loss, decline, those are much more powerful words than just affect. So we don't want to say clear cutting affects biodiversity. Well, in what way? In what directionality? Right. Yeah. So I think being very specific how you describe those relationships is really, really good to do as well.
And finally, explain why deforestation is occurring. That explain why is providing reasons. And whenever I explain why, I'm going to have that because in there. So many people in developing countries rely on fuel wood and cut trees because their only source of energy otherwise is to burn wood directly or the charcoal. Another example may be they use slash and burn agriculture to clear land and grow crops because of the pressures of trying to feed a rapidly growing population.
And you just need that number of sentences to get that job done. So if you see explain, know that you're going to have a couple sentences with really strong verbs and really strong explanations in there, much more than an identifier describe.
Describe isn't going to need a lot of sentences. Remember, describe, I'm giving a few characteristics. I'm not keeping going and explaining a process. So let's wrap back around. Now that we've kind of framed how to identify and describe a problem, let's dig into the solutions part of it a little bit. So if we stick with our loss of biodiversity because of deforestation, a potential solution to that problem may be to provide solar energy devices to people in the developing world. They can be used for cooking and heating water. So I've listed the relevant characteristics of my approach. Next, I might have to describe advantages, disadvantages, or unintended consequences. An advantage of using solar ovens is that solar energy is renewable and it's real plentiful in the developed world. It's a low, inexpensive, low tech, low cost alternative. And then there's two other parts of that practice that we want to mention. One, practice 7D, is using data and evidence to support a solution. And finally, F is to justify a proposed solution by explaining potential advantages. So there's a chart here, some data or evidence that's showing me the percent contribution to local health risk in different regions of the country based on indoor versus outdoor air pollution. And so when I look at this, I could say, well, solar ovens are a good option to replace wood because there are no emissions. Burning wood and charcoal releases particulate matter, a harmful indoor air pollutant that causes respiratory problems. So when I did that justify a proposed solution, make a note to yourself, and we're going to come back to this in a second, that I kind of want to compare it. I want to justify why my solution is really good by comparing it to the disadvantages of a different solution. So kind of extending that using data and evidence and supporting it, supporting my or justifying my solution, go back to that I-squared technique that Dr. Sowell and I talked with you about through the review lessons. In both of the practice exams you took, boy, Dr. Sowell, I think both practice tests, both questions had a diagram, didn't they? They have some type of model or data that it isn't necessarily going to be quantitative data, but there's going to be some chart diagram model that you have to interpret. And remember, your strategy there should be to first, before you even read the prompt, dig into what that diagram is showing you and make sure you can make sense of it. Let's take a look at the bottom one for a second. I think that's a really good example. This is a chart that was on last year's free response question. I graded that question, and I can tell you that students weren't using the I-squared method. Bad students. Because it was so obvious when some of them talked about a pH value, they didn't realize there was a whole nother scale over there on the right-hand side of the axis. They were giving pH values, like they could see where that pH line was, but they were giving a pH value of 320. So they were reading that line off of the same scale. And had they spent probably one additional minute doing that identify, interpret, I think some of the points would have been a lot easier for them. So remember, I want to look at my axes, look at the lines, and interpret that data. So on the left axis, I have carbon dioxide concentration in parts per million. On the right axis, I have a pH scale. My x-axis is years. So there's a change in both carbon dioxide and pH over time. I can see that over time, carbon dioxide is going up. And since they started taking pH measurements over that same time scale, pH is going down. Now, even my best students that have a really strong chemistry background get pH confused. And remember, Dr. Sowell just said, I can't just say pH changes. Well, that's not an answer. So I always prompt my kids, if pH is going down, literally write on a note to yourself on the side, dropping pH, does that mean it's getting more acidic or basic? It's getting more acidic. So just taking that little bit of time to identify and interpret the data makes the rest of the questions a lot easier.
And I got to just listen to how Ms. Fassler walked through that graph. Rewind this video when you get a second and listen to how she talked about it, because she told you the pieces and the parts before she told you the story. And I think that's what you should do as well. And that's what this I-squared does. It says, let's figure out the characters. What's the axes? What are the data? It's figuring out the characters before you tell the story. So rewind it. She did a beautiful job of doing that. So it's a good piece of advice.
Okay, and then a few just general tips for solutions. There's a lot of really specific strategies, and they come in like air pollution and energy, deforestation. Like for every unit you have when you're organizing those charts, every problem you have, there's going to be a content specific solution. But then there's also a lot of general solutions, such as I could provide a public service announcement to inform people about a problem and strategies they can do to help. So a good example of that would be to say, if I want to stop the spread of invasive species, I would have posters and public service announcements telling people to wash off their boats before they take them out of the water and put them to another boat or to another body of water. That works for a public service announcement, announcement because they're educating me, the public, and it's a choice that I can make to solve that problem. What doesn't work is say, have a public address announcement about how dangerous SOx emissions are from coal burning plants. I have no control over whether my coal burning plant installs a wet scrubber or not. Make sure your solutions are realistic, and the prompt will often even say this. So it is not realistic to shoot nuclear waste into space. Like on paper, I could do that, but a realistic strategy would be to provide long-term geologic storage. A couple additional tips. In general, I can often pass or enforce existing legislation. In terms of maintaining population sizes, I can set a limit or a quota, or I could require that those coal burning plants install a wet scrubber. I could legislate that. I could have things that could incentivize or disincentivize many of the harmful practices. I could add a sales tax to gas to reduce emissions. I could reduce SOx by increasing the cost of gasoline and therefore reduce emissions. But remember, the government doesn't set the price of goods and services. The government can tax things. The government can provide a subsidy. They can give me a rebate if I buy an electric vehicle, but they don't determine the price of the electric vehicle. And finally, never just ban something. Don't say, oh, the deforestation is easy, just don't cut down trees. But I can always provide a sustainable solution or an alternative product. And then just remember that justify. That's what's considered the most challenging part of that solution question. If I am going to justify a solution by explaining potential advantages, remember I want to do that by comparing it to why it's better than something else.
Yeah, it's one thing to find one solution. It's another thing to realize that there's several solutions and justify which one's better. That's a different level skill. All right, so that is one of the big practices, obviously solutions to environmental problems. The other big practices are scientific experiments. And I know Ms. Fassler and I have many, many times talked about scientific experimentation and research design. So you're probably going to have some form of this, or you are going to have some form of this in question one, and it could come in the form of you describing an existing experiment, or it could be you developing your own experiment and methods. So we're going to practice a little bit of those today. But again, like Ms. Fassler said, as the practices go down, they get much more complex. I do want to point out 4D. This says not assessed. That's because this is you making those observations when you were in your class doing labs. So don't get stressed out that this says not assessed. Just go A, B, C, and then down to E when you review it. All right, so let's start with A, just identifying a testable question or a hypothesis. And this will come from you reading something about a piece of research or reading some information on a certain topic, and then you can develop a question based on that. So for example, let's say that you were reading about the effects of indoor air pollutants on small children, and you want to run an experiment to see if the pollutant levels are different nearer the ground where the babies crawl. Well, to put that in the form of a testable question, you might want to say, how does height affect the amount of particulate matter pollution in the home? Then we get into looking at those variables, identifying the variables in the control groups and all of that stuff in an experiment. So for this experiment, we could take Petri dishes or some kind of little plastic material, put something sticky on it like petroleum jelly, and put them at different heights in the house. So one of the first things you should do is talk about your variables. So your independent variable would be the height at which you place the Petri dish. Some low, some medium, some high, some really high. That's your independent. That's what you are manipulating. The dependent variable, the goal of all of this is to determine how that affects the amount of particulate matter pollution. Do you have a control group? Absolutely should have a control group. You want a Petri dish that you never open and expose to the indoor air, because that will give you a baseline comparison for how much particulate matter might naturally have been in the petroleum jelly to start with. So there are lots of things that you need to keep the same though, these constants. So the size of the Petri dish, the amount of the petroleum jelly, how long you expose it to the air, So this is a situation in which you may be provided with an experiment and need to identify some of these things. So then describing, especially describing methods. This has popped up a few times in the experimental design questions that we've reviewed, where you need to describe either the existing methods or a modification to a method. So you could say, for example, I'm going to place Petri dishes at 5 different heights in a home, and I'm going to open it up at 5 p.m. and close them 24 hours later. Then I'm going to bring them into the lab and use a stereoscope to count the PM matter on the dish. So that's a very simple method that explains how you're going to do your experiment. Finally, you get to this modifications, and this is where, just like Miss Fassler's last thing on the list is kind of the hardest, that justifying of a solution, this is where it gets a little tricky too. Because you're being asked to not critique an experiment, well, kind of, yeah, you're being asked to take a critical eye on an experiment and see if you can either A, make it better to get more robust results or more results in general, or is there a new question that you could ask based on the experiment? So let's look through both of those. So one possible error when I think of this experiment is where we did this. Maybe Miss Fassler puts hers in the bedroom and I put mine in the bathroom, and someone else puts theirs in the kitchen. We have this new variable in there that we didn't really account for when we first started. So that's one thing that I could identify as an error and then make some suggestions for modifications. Or I might have a whole new idea, maybe about ventilation. So I could do a very different type of change to my method to see how ventilation affects the results. I could have some in an open room with lots of ventilation and some in a closed room. But even with that modification, the dependent variable is still the same. The goal is still the same, to determine the effect on the amount of particulate matter pollution. Ms. Fassler, any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, Dr. Saul just described a really amazing experiment with the Petri dishes and petroleum jelly. And I'm guessing he probably did that experiment with his students. If you look at that and you're like, boy, I never did experiment, I don't know if I could like state that specifically, you understand that you need to monitor particulate level. And so even if you can't be as detailed as saying a Petri dish with some petroleum jelly, just say I can put out an air collection device or an air collection monitor, and you're still going to get the idea across. Trust me, a lot of you have done different experiments that depending on the scenario, you're going to be able to describe something really specific like that. But understand that again, if you get that you need to monitor the air, say I can install air pollution monitors.
Or if we were talking about a water quality test and you were interested in turbidity, but you don't remember Secchi disk or a turbidity tube or some of that language, you could say, I'm going to measure and monitor how cloudy the water is.
Right.
So yeah, so
It's a piece of equipment.
yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see here. So let's just look at another experimental design question, and some of you may find this familiar from a few days ago. So it says, scientists are interested in investigating how limestone can be used to remediate the effects of acid rain. They collect water from a lake that has been recently exposed to acid rain. They divide the water into 10 different tanks and add different amounts of limestone to 9 of the tanks. One of the tanks, they don't put any limestone in it. The pH of the water in the tanks is measured before the limestone is added and once every hour for 24 hours. So first thing we can do is just identify some basic things like variables. So our question is, well, what effect does limestone have on the pH of the water which has been exposed to acid rain? The independent, yeah. I'm sorry, Ms. Fassler?
A good question.
Yes, good question. Independent variable would be the amount of limestone you put in each of the tanks. The dependent, the pH of the water. That's what you're trying to determine. Your control group would be the tank with no limestone added. That acts as your baseline comparison. Your methods, well, that would be your methods up here. And modifications, maybe you want to investigate temperature. Maybe you think that the temperature of the different tanks might affect the ability of limestone to reduce the pH. Or maybe you actually think that there might be a difference between salt water versus fresh water in terms of this. So you could look at levels of salinity. But again, no matter how you're changing this, your goal still is to explore limestone's ability to mitigate the effects of acid rain in this water. Ms. Fassler, anything on your radar when you think of that?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Again, yeah, it still has to do with limestone and pH. I'm
right.
just changing that one other variable.
Right. A modification would not be how does temperature affect species richness of tadpoles? You know what I mean? Like you're not going to go in a completely different direction. You want to stay focused on the purpose of the experiment. So those are our two big pieces of advice. Really understand how to give us a good explanation of a problem and a solution and justify that solution, and be able to really take a critical eye on experimental procedures. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fassler to talk briefly about the 5 steps.
Okay, so hopefully this screen looks familiar to you as well. Try the exam demo. Any student of mine, Dr. Saul, I'm sure would say the same thing. Anybody that's done it found it very helpful. If you're taking more than one AP exam, you don't need to do it for each one. The process is the same. You just don't want any surprises on exam day. Complete the checklist. And a lot of those things are, boy, simple things that I wouldn't have thought of. Let your family know I'm taking an AP exam now. Can everybody stay off Wi-Fi because maybe my bandwidth is a little limited? Let your family know I need a quiet place to sit during this time. I have a student that's going to sit in their car in the parking lot of the school because that's where they can log in and get internet. And they said, you know what? I'm there by myself. It's quiet. I can make that work. So just plan ahead. You got lots of time. Confirm your email. Your e-ticket you should get, is it 48 hours, Dr. Sowell? I think
Yeah, I think it's 2 days before. Yeah.
Before the exam. And that's a different e-ticket for every AP exam you take. So make sure you have that. That's why they're sending it 2 days early. If you don't get it, reach out to your AP teacher or AP coordinator. Maybe they can help you. And then this is really important. Check in 30 minutes early for your exam.
And the only other thing I would suggest is on that demo, try it multiple times, because you do have 3 ways of submitting responses: the copy and paste, the attach, or the handwriting. So I asked my students to do it 3 times, once with each method, just to see how it feels and where the snags are and where the technology might fall apart. So you can try that demo as many times as you want. Absolutely. So we want to leave you with our little inspirational moment here. So I think Ms. Fassler and I believe that this is an incredibly important course. Yes, it's the best AP course in the world.
We want to live in a world where every student has taken APES.
Absolutely. And so we would really want you to, yes, I want you to get a 3, 4, or 5 on the AP exam, but I also want you to use what you've learned during the course. So let's take a look at this. And then, yay. And then finally, we want to share a short video clip that was produced by the College Board, thanking you all for sticking with all of these review sessions. So let's see if I can get this to work on my computer. Let's see here. I want to do a new share. Let's try this, see if that works. Ms. Fassler, can you see that?
We're good.
Perfect. All right, here we go.
We are live.
So we're going to walk you through everything you need to know and you're going to have it. And so, may the 4th be with you.
Continuiamo anche il nostro giro per l'Italia.
You Are a Local Lunatic shared this via Twitter. I'm really, really grateful for @JacobsPhysics and @Mr. JB Physics and just @College Board in general for doing so much for these AP exam reviews. I actually get stuff a lot more than I did before COVID happened, and I'm just really, really grateful for that. Smiley face.
All right, so we're talking about the overall big picture of period 4. Here are some things I just want you guys to remember.
KOA shared on TikTok, AP English Zoom streams are my only social interaction right now. #FYP, #isolation, #AP English.
They would send large ships of laborers just to collect the guano and get on the ship. Is collect the right word? Do you mine guano? Do you excavate it? I don't know what the verb is there. I'm supposed to be using.
And we're going to be focusing on tone. Specifically, how do you read and interpret tone?
Karen Tabola Moore on Facebook shared, my students have enjoyed the AP Latin videos with Jeannie Luangu. Since I can only give a live Zoom class twice a week, this has been a great support.
Or I could say I want my lawyer and they have to get me my representation. But, and here's our but for today, that is going to sacrifice the abilities of the community.
Am I sharing the slideshow right now, by the way?
Nope. If you are, I can't see it.
Utkarsh Kali shared on Twitter, thank you for the helpful AP classes on YouTube. My preparation for AP Calc VC has become so much easier and efficient.
So I drew this like 4 o'clock this morning. So it's not beautiful, but I think it gets the point.
You turn over another card and they get compared and that person would win. Tell me if you do it differently, Mr. Schultz.
Nope.
The more that you can find that connection within yourself, within the character, I feel like you write the character with a lot more depth.
Learning about the economy is important, and I wish more people did what you're doing.
My advice to all the students out there, whatever it is you choose to go into, make sure that it's a passion that burns in your belly.
I learned so much working in local government about public service. It teaches you that it's 24/7 and that you have to learn to listen.
I am someone who believes in following your passion, right, and working hard. And if you kind of find that there's something out there that you think is a need in the market and no one else is making it, then maybe you have to be a little bit creative.
11th grade US history is the reason we're talking, because I don't think I would have picked up Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton if I hadn't written a paper on Alexander Hamilton in high school.
Asia K3 shared on Instagram, I'm so glad he came. He's the reason I was able to get more interested in US history, and I always listen to the Hamilton soundtrack when studying for English. Emoji.
We have a message here from Girleen from Instagram. She says, definitely worth waking up before noon.
And so you just connect your battery to your magnet like this, and then you get copper. Ta-da!
Look at that. That's amazing.
When are we ever going to need calculus? You'd be surprised. I mean, you might make videos and then calculate like the breaking pressure of Thanos' abdomen if Ant-Man were inside it.
This one hit close to home. This is very special for me. Mr. Walters teaches in Managua, Nicaragua, and that's where I was born. And I want to say hello to all the students out there.
Lyra Matt tweeted, I watch every AP Lit video. They're so helpful, especially for students whose first language is not English. Ms. Barber and Mr. Carter's enthusiasm and passion inspired and encouraged me not to give up.
Mire, Julia de Burgos nace, es todo un mito
en la littérature caribeña.
Pour souligner encore ce qu'on essaie de faire, on veut expliquer des idées et des opinions.
Mrs. Lowe shared on Twitter, these videos are excellent. They do a great job of reviewing mixed material with an awesome job of presenting new material.
好，下面是 cultural presentation。抱歉让大家坐着哈，但是这个很重要。
今日も一緒に日本語頑張って勉強しましょうよ。はい、それで。
Chanel Kernander said on Twitter, "Love Mr. Escobar and Miss Barber's videos for my AP Lit students. You two are awesome. Tuning in live from Houston, Texas."
What'd you say for Dabo? Did you answer what that means?
Future. I will give.
Just as Gandalf parted ways with the hobbits before they undertook the scouring of the Shire, the time is almost here for Josh and me to sail into the West.
Thanks for showing up every day and reviewing the course with us. And remember, on the exam, sound like you've taken the course. Be specific and be scientific.
It's been a blast working with you all spring. And like I said, this chapter of your life isn't over. You now have a chance to rewrite.
Thank you so much for watching Mark and me for these last 30, I don't know, however many sessions we had. And if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have had these sessions.
Well, thanks for watching. And one final piece of advice. If the question seems really complicated, it's probably not.
Gracias por haberme acompañado durante estas semanas.
I just want to say thank you to all the amazing AP Statistics students out there that have been following along with us for the past 6 weeks.
Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it and hope these videos have helped.
Hearing from you and seeing the pictures that you've sent us of your pets, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you to everyone for watching, for tuning in, for continuing your educations. Best of luck on your exams.
You've prepared, you're ready, do your best on this exam, and then congratulate yourself no matter what you get.
Optimum Fortunam Omnibus. Best of luck to everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to all of our AP Bio review lessons and our practice exam.
Bon courage, as we say en français.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Luke and I really had a super fun time, and we hope you learned a lot.
Thank you to all of the AP Chemistry students who watched the videos.
You're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you.
Thanks for tuning into all these videos. Music theory friends, don't forget to resolve your tendency tones.
You guys have got this. Remember, you are the solution.
Thank you so much for joining me the past month and a half. It's been such a journey and such a treat for me.
Hey, thanks for watching the last 6 weeks, especially the calculus crew.
You guys are awesome. You are excellent. You are brilliant. I really, really enjoyed our time together, and I know you guys are going to rock that exam next week.
Just remember that you have worked your butts off this year. Y'all are going to do great.
It is time for you to shine.
Type your response, copy it, paste it in the submission box. Good luck.
Hey, arigato. Thank you. Ganbatte kudasai. Remember to practice on the app that comes out next week.
Y'all are going to do great. And remember, geography is everywhere.
Yay! Ms. Fassler, is my PowerPoint back up?
It is.
All right. So we just all want to say thank you again for watching and good luck on the exam. Ms. Fassler, any parting words from you?
You know, you guys are scientists now. You have completed and you're going to pass an AP exam and you're scientists. So use that for a positive force to do good things in the world. Bye, guys.
Bye, apes.
Bye.
Good luck. Cheers.